Maureen had barely reached the front door when the second knock came. She opened it slowly. 3 familiar faces stood on her porch. Her mother, her father, her older sister. None of them had spoken to her in 16 years. Diane Carter clasped her hands together as though she had rehearsed this moment 100 times. "We're not here to fight," she said quietly. We'd just like to meet our grandson." Maureen didn't answer. Her gaze drifted from her mother's tired eyes to her father's lowered head, then finally to the sister who had never once apologized. "So now you remember I have a son?" Maureen asked. Silence. After several long seconds, she stepped aside. "Come in." The 3 of them crossed the threshold. Then every one of them stopped. The living room walls were covered with framed photographs. A young man smiling with his arm around Maureen. The same young man holding ultrasound pictures. The same young man laughing beside a lake. And above the fireplace hung a large memorial portrait. Noah Carter. Forever loved. Diane's breath caught. "Noah," she whispered. Her knees nearly gave way. The room spun around her. If Noah's picture filled this house, if Noah had been part of this family, then whose child had they spent 16 years believing Maureen had carried? Maureen watched the realization begin to spread across their faces, but she said nothing. She had waited 16 years for them to ask the questions they should have asked before destroying her life. 16 years earlier, none of this had seemed possible. She had been 19. Young. Terrified. Still trying to understand how life could bring unbearable grief and unexpected hope in the same week. Only 4 days after attending Noah's funeral, Maureen stared at the pregnancy test in her apartment bathroom. 2 pink lines. She slid down the wall, clutching the small plastic stick against her chest. "Noah," she whispered through tears, "you were going to be a dad." They had planned everything. The engagement. The apartment they hoped to rent after saving enough money. The announcement to both families. Instead, Noah had been killed in a workplace accident before either family knew they were expecting a child together. For 2 days, Maureen struggled with what to do. She considered calling Noah's parents. She picked up the phone more than once before setting it back down. They had just buried their only son. How could she ask them to carry even more heartbreak? Finally, she decided to tell her own parents first. She believed they would help her find the right way to tell Noah's family. That Saturday evening, she drove to the house where she had grown up. Her parents were already home. So were her older sister and brother-in-law. Everyone sat around the dining room table, finishing coffee after dinner. Maureen took a slow breath. I need to tell everyone something." Her mother smiled politely. "What is it?" Maureen's hands trembled beneath the table. "I'm pregnant." The room became perfectly still. She opened her mouth to explain about Noah. But Diane's chair scraped violently across the floor as she shot to her feet. Her face twisted with fury. She pointed directly at Maureen. "Don't insult us by lying," she shouted. "We already know whose baby you're carrying." Maureen stared at her mother, unable to process what she had just heard. "What are you talking about?" she asked. "Mom, please just let me explain." "You've done enough explaining," Diane snapped. "Your sister already told us everything." Maureen turned toward her older sister, Vanessa, whose eyes were already filled with tears. Vanessa shook her head, as though she wished none of this had happened. "I didn't want to tell them," she said softly, "but after what you confessed to me, I couldn't keep a secret like this." Maureen frowned in disbelief. "Confessed? Vanessa, what are you saying?" Vanessa looked down. "You admitted the baby belongs to Eric." The words landed like a physical blow. Maureen whipped around to her brother-in-law. Eric's face had gone pale. He opened his mouth, closed it again, then stared helplessly at the floor. "Eric," Maureen pleaded, "tell them that's not true." He swallowed hard but said nothing. That silence was all Diane needed. "I welcomed you into this home," Diane cried, "and you repay your own sister by destroying her marriage." "No," Maureen shouted. "I've never been with Eric. I came here to tell you about Noah." "You will not drag that poor boy's name into your lies," Diane interrupted. Every time Maureen tried to speak, someone talked over her. Her father rubbed his forehead, but never looked at her. "Maybe it's best if you leave for tonight," he murmured. Maureen stared at him. "Dad, you don't believe this either, do you?" He couldn't answer. Instead, he stood and walked toward the window. An hour later, Maureen zipped the only suitcase she had managed to pack. Her childhood bedroom suddenly looked unfamiliar, as if it already belonged to someone else. She carried the suitcase to the front door, hoping, just once, that someone would stop her. No one did. Diane opened the door herself. "Don't come back until you're ready to tell the truth." Maureen stepped onto the porch with nowhere to go, one hand resting protectively over her stomach. As she reached the end of the walkway, Vanessa quietly caught up to her. Without looking at her, she whispered, "No one will ever believe you now." By Monday morning, Maureen realized she hadn't just lost her family. She had lost her reputation. At the grocery store, two women from church stopped talking the moment she pushed her cart into the aisle. One of them glanced at her stomach, then leaned toward the other. "That's her," she whispered, just loud enough for Maureen to hear. The other woman sighed. "I feel terrible for Vanessa." Maureen gripped the cart handle until her knuckles turned white. She wanted to tell them they had it all wrong. Instead, she walked away. The rumors spread faster than she ever imagined. People who had watched her grow up suddenly avoided eye contact. A family friend canceled a job interview after saying, "We're looking for someone who won't bring unnecessary attention to the business." At church the following Sunday, conversations stopped as she entered the sanctuary. She made it halfway down the aisle before someone quietly suggested she should take some time away. Maureen turned around and walked out before the service even began. That afternoon, she made the hardest decision of her life. She packed everything that fit into her aging sedan and left town without telling anyone where she was going. In a city where no one knew her name, she rented a tiny apartment, worked long shifts wherever she could, and months later gave birth to a healthy baby boy. She named him Caleb. Every achievement that followed came through persistence. She earned promotions, built a stable career, bought a modest home, and filled it with the love her son deserved. She never spoke bitterly about the family that had abandoned her. When Caleb asked about his father, she showed him photographs of Noah and told him stories about the kind, gentle man who had dreamed of becoming his dad. Years passed. Then one afternoon, Noah's parents stumbled across a graduation photo Maureen had posted online. His mother froze. "The eyes," she whispered, "those are Noah's eyes." After quietly reaching out, they met Maureen, listened to her story, and, with everyone's agreement, a DNA test confirmed what their hearts already believed. They embraced both Maureen and Caleb without hesitation, becoming the family she thought she had lost forever. Meanwhile, back in her hometown, Diane remained convinced she had done the right thing. Until one morning, an unmarked envelope appeared in her mailbox. Inside was a single photograph. Caleb stood smiling between Noah's mother and father at his graduation ceremony. Diane's hands began to shake. Diane must have looked at the photograph 100 times before she finally drove to Noah's parents' house. When Mrs. Harper opened the door, surprise quickly faded into guarded calm. "Diane," she said, "I wondered if this day would ever come." Diane held up the graduation picture with trembling hands. "Please, tell me whose boy this is." Mrs. Harper didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stepped aside. "You'd better come in." The walls inside looked strangely familiar. Photographs of Noah. Photographs of Maureen. Photographs of a smiling teenage boy standing between them at birthdays, holidays, and graduation ceremonies. Diane's voice cracked. You've known him. For years, Mr. Harper replied. He's our grandson. Diane's face drained of color. Why didn't anyone tell us? Mrs. Harper met her eyes steadily. Because that wasn't our truth to reveal. Maureen deserved to decide whether you ever learned it. The drive home felt endless. That evening, Diane walked straight into Vanessa's house. Eric answered the door. We need to talk, Diane said. Minutes later, all three sat in tense silence. Diane laid the graduation photo on the coffee table. Tell me the truth. Vanessa immediately looked away. There isn't anything else to say. Diane turned to Eric. You've been silent for 16 years. Eric buried his face in his hands. I can't do it anymore. Vanessa's head snapped toward him. Eric. No. His voice was firmer than Diane had ever heard. Maureen never had an affair. The room fell silent. Eric continued. Vanessa told me if I denied the story, everyone would think I was protecting myself. She said our marriage wouldn't survive the scandal if the truth came out. Diane slowly looked at her daughter. Vanessa's eyes filled with panic. It wasn't supposed to go this far. Eric stood and disappeared into his home office. When he returned, he carried an old laptop. I kept everything. Within minutes, cloud backups restored years-old messages. There were conversations between Noah and Maureen discussing an engagement ring. Screenshots of ultrasound appointment, dates they planned to attend together. Messages about telling both families the following weekend. Then came another thread. Vanessa messaging a friend days before the confrontation. I'm ending this before she steals everyone's attention again. Another message followed. Mom will believe me before she ever listens to Maureen. Diane covered her mouth. Every accusation. Every cruel word. Every year of silence. All of it had begun before Maureen had even walked through the front door that night. Without another word, Diane stood. Get your father, she told Eric quietly. An hour later, the three of them sat in the car outside a modest brick home. No one spoke. Diane finally climbed the front steps and knocked. The door opened. Maureen looked at each of them, then stepped aside. Her voice was calm. If you're finally here for the truth. She looked directly at her mother. Come in. Maureen closed the door behind them and quietly led them into the living room. No one spoke. The silence was broken only by the ticking of a clock above the fireplace. Diane's eyes wandered across the room. There were photographs documenting years she had never witnessed. Caleb's first birthday. His first day of school. Family vacations. Christmas mornings. Every milestone included Noah's parents. Every empty space where Diane should have been was impossible to ignore. Maureen walked to a wooden cabinet and opened a neatly organized box. I've kept these for 16 years, she said. She placed the contents on the coffee table one by one. Noah's handwritten letters. The receipt for the engagement ring he had purchased 2 weeks before his accident. Hospital records showing the date her pregnancy had been confirmed. The ultrasound appointment they had scheduled together. Finally, she laid the DNA results beside the photographs. My son has only ever had one father, Maureen said quietly, and you knew his name long before you knew my son's. Diane's knees buckled. She sank into a chair, covering her face as sobs escaped between trembling fingers. I never let you explain, she whispered. No, Maureen replied. You decided who I was before I spoke a single sentence. Her father stepped forward, tears filling his eyes. I failed you. Maureen looked at him for a long moment. You did. He lowered his head. I was afraid of creating conflict. You avoided conflict, Maureen answered softly. I lived with the consequences. Vanessa had remained silent since arriving. Now she finally broke. I'm sorry, she cried. I was jealous. Maureen didn't interrupt. Vanessa wiped her eyes. My marriage was falling apart. Then I found Noah's messages about proposing to you. Everyone was excited for your future, and I couldn't stand it. She took a shaky breath. So I lied. I told Mom you admitted the baby was Eric's. I thought she'd confront you first. You thought she'd listen, Maureen said. Vanessa nodded through tears. I never imagined she'd throw you out. You imagined enough, Maureen replied. No one argued. There was nothing left to defend. Over the following weeks, the truth spread through the family and the church community. Relatives who had once refused Maureen's calls apologized for believing gossip instead of asking questions. The church elders privately acknowledged how quickly judgment had replaced compassion. Vanessa's marriage collapsed under the weight of years of deception. Her confession destroyed the credibility she had protected for so long. Diane resigned from the leadership position she had held for years. She told the congregation she had failed to practice the grace she preached. But some losses could not be repaired. 16 birthdays. 16 Christmas mornings. 16 years of watching a grandson grow through photographs instead of memories. Time refused to return what pride had taken. Months later, Diane and her husband visited again. Not as parents demanding forgiveness, but as grandparents learning, patiently and respectfully, how to earn a place in Caleb's life. Maureen never pretended the past hadn't happened. She welcomed honest effort, not entitled expectations. Trust returned slowly, one choice at a time. As evening settled outside, Diane and her husband quietly said goodbye. Maureen closed the front door and leaned against it for a moment. Caleb walked into the living room and smiled. They're different now, he said. I hope so, Maureen answered. She looked toward Noah's portrait above the fireplace. Then at the son they had created together. The people who had believed her, when it mattered most, had helped her build a life stronger than the one she had lost. She smiled, switched off the hallway light, and walked forward with the family that had chosen truth over judgment.